Late at night, long after the courthouse lights dim and voices fade, Walter sweeps the marble halls alone. His scarred face draws whispers. His silence draws none. When a young cop mocks him during a ceremony, loud enough for guests to laugh, Walter keeps sweeping, untouched. But from the crowd, one man doesn't laugh. He rises, steps forward, and salutes. "You saved my life in Berlin," he says. In that moment, the janitor nobody saw becomes the hero no one can forget. The city courthouse, by day, throbbed with urgency. Shuffling papers, clicking heels, and raised voices echoed through its marble corridors like a drumbeat of bureaucracy and law. But by night, all that faded into silence, thick, velvety, and near sacred. That's when Walter arrived. He never clocked in with the others. He came later, long after the bailiffs had gone home and the echo of gavels had dulled. His keys jingled softly against his worn belt loop as he moved from floor to floor with a slow, deliberate gait. Each step carried the faint drag of his right leg, a limp that time refused to heal. His uniform was always clean, his collar pressed. A white patch stitched onto his dark blue shirt bore his name in cursive thread, Walter. Few people knew his last name. Fewer had ever asked. Walter's presence passed unnoticed to most, like background hum in a building wired for ambition. The security cameras caught his movements, but rarely his face. The staff barely registered him beyond the occasional murmured "evenin'" or a half-hearted nod. To them, he was a fixture, like the water cooler or the vending machine down the hall. Functional, silent, there. And yet Walter noticed everything. He noticed when Judge Ramirez began showing up earlier, tension clinging to her like perfume. He noticed when the court stenographer started limping slightly, a twin echo to his own. He saw when two young officers began whispering near the east stairwell, their glances darting toward him between giggles. He didn't need to hear the words. Their laughter said enough. His scar, jagged, weathered, crawling from the base of his left ear down to the collarbone, seemed to make them uncomfortable. Not for its grotesqueness, but for how it asked questions without saying a word. Some called him Two-Face when they thought he couldn't hear. Others simply avoided his gaze altogether, as if guilt might spring from meeting it. Walter never flinched, never snapped back. He swept, emptied trash bins, and replaced paper towels with quiet precision. His tools were his language, the broom and mop, his dialogue with a world that had grown too loud, too shallow to understand silence. Sometimes, while scrubbing the scuff marks from the courtroom floor, he would pause and glance at the judge's bench, just for a moment. His eyes would fix on a spot just to the left of the gavel. Then, with a soft sigh, he'd continue on. He didn't hate the courthouse. In fact, it suited him. The symmetry, the routine, the way light fractured through the stained glass windows near the atrium. It was a place of order, of consequence. And though no one knew, it reminded Walter of something else, a place once filled with fire, smoke, and the weight of broken bodies, but that was long ago, another lifetime. Now he was just the janitor, the man with the scar, the one who kept the halls clean after justice had gone to sleep. Mid-morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the courthouse lobby, dust motes dancing like restless spirits in the broad beams. By day, the building hummed with purpose. Attorneys hurried to hearings, clerks shuffled files, and the public lingered in the foyer, anxious for verdicts nobody could guarantee. In this hive of authority and ambition, gossip circulated faster than paper through the copy machine. Officer Tyler leaned against the reception desk, swagger in his shoulders and pride in his uniform's fresh crease. He was only 25, still flush with the prestige of his new badge, only weeks on the force, and he already fancied himself a rising star. His pale blue eyes glinted as he recounted last night's patrol to the courthouse security officers. "Yeah, we pulled over a guy for jaywalking," Tyler said, voice pitched just loud enough for the clerks filing past to catch. "Turns out he was carrying—" He paused for effect, lowering his tone to a theatrical whisper. "A kilo of— Never mind. Point is, things got interesting." Laughter bubbled among the group. Tyler's grin widened. He soaked up their attention like a spotlight operator and reveled in it. Then, without warning, he glanced toward the mop closet and spotted Walter, silent sentinel of the night shift, leaning on his broom. "Hey," Tyler called out, loud enough to carry. "Two-Face, got any ghosts to chase down today?" A ripple of nervous chuckles followed. The security officer's eyes shifted, some furtive, some outright curious. Walter stood perfectly still, mop in hand, as if the world had paused but him. He did not respond. His lips remained sealed, corners neither quivering nor drawn tight. That was the sting. The silence forced Tyler to fill the void. "You hear me?" Tyler prodded, stepping forward. The reception desk's granite top caught the harsh glare of overhead lights, and Tyler's reflection warped, his uniform crisp, his hair neatly trimmed, his face unmarked. Next to him, Walter's scar was a canyon of memory. Tyler jabbed a finger in its direction. "Scar's that new thing? Or you just decided personalizing your face was cheaper than surgery?" The cluster of onlookers tittered, a brittle sound echoing off marble. Walter kept sweeping, as though the words were raindrops on an umbrella, noticeable but never breaking the surface. In the back of the crowd, a courthouse clerk nudged her colleague, whispering, "Why do you think he never talks back?" The colleague shrugged, eyes averted. Another jury was sworn in across the hall, oblivious to the microdrama unfolding at the edge of their attention. Tyler straightened, chest puffed. "Thought so," he said with a self-satisfied chuckle. "Keep your secrets, man. I'm moving up. Don't need a gloomy janitor's pity." A security guard cleared his throat. "Maybe let him be, Tyler." "Relax, Johnson," Tyler snapped, but his tone slipped. He hated being challenged. Johnson pressed his lips into a tight line, shook his head, and turned back to his post. Walter's mop paused mid-sweep. His gaze lifted slowly, eyes piercing Tyler's own with a calmness that made the rookie's bravado flicker. And then silence again. The courthouse buzz resumed around them, heels clicking, papers shuffling, the machinery of justice indifferent to the human cruelty playing out in its halls. Walter exhaled softly and resumed his work. But beneath that quiet rhythm, a memory stirred. Ashes, heat, a man calling his name in desperation. It had nothing to do with jaywalking. And far more to do with sacrifices Tyler could scarcely imagine. Tyler's uniform fit him like a second skin, crisp, authoritative, impossibly straight across the shoulders. He strode the courthouse corridors with the self-assured air of a man certain he belonged, head held high, belt gleaming. To bystanders, he was the picture of law and order, pristine badge, polished boots, the quiet confidence of someone who believed he was destined for more than parking tickets and jaywalking stops. But beneath that confident stride lay a restless pulse of doubt. Days before he transferred to courthouse duty, he'd lain awake in the barracks, staring at the ceiling's flickering fluorescent panel. Memories of his first day at the academy haunted him, sweat stinging his palms when he failed the drill sergeant's inspection, the roar of classmates' laughter when he fumbled the obstacle course. He buried that shame in overtime shifts, extra certifications, and a relentless need to prove himself. Back in the lobby, Tyler exchanged a quick nod with his partner, Officer Ramos, a steady presence whose quiet competence Tyler both admired and resented. Ramos never bragged, never needed an audience. Tyler, in contrast, needed applause. He craved the nods of judges and the respectful distance of attorneys. So he laughed louder at his own jokes, threw his weight around parking decals, and mocked whoever appeared weaker. He'd noticed Walter on his first week, the silent janitor with the scar. At first, Tyler saw a challenge, an easy target, a man who could not or would not fight back. He started with offhand comments. "Careful, man, you're leaning too hard on that mop." When his jokes earned chuckles, he grew bolder. Behind closed doors, he called Walter Two-Face, telling Ramos it was just locker room humor. Yet each jibe left an unexpected sting. At night, Tyler would catch himself glancing at the scar's pale ridges in the reception mirror. He saw more than disfigurement. He sensed history, something he couldn't name. But admitting that would undercut the persona he'd built. So he doubled down, cracked louder jokes, elbowed Ramos when someone dared sympathize, swaggering through each day as if the weight of his insecurities could be lifted by mockery. In the break room that morning, Tyler reheated coffee and caught sight of a news brief on the TV monitor. An old courthouse police inspector, recently retired, being honored for decades of service. The inspector's lined face and steady eyes were nothing like Walter's scar, but in that moment, Tyler felt a pang of envy. Here was a man celebrated for loyalty and dedication, qualities Tyler had hoped to claim for himself. He shook it. Off, 2 fingers tapping the paper cup in time with an anxious beat of his heart. "Come on," he muttered, "don't get soft." When he spotted Walter sweeping by the east staircase, that memory and the guilt faded. He straightened his back, squared his jaw, and walked toward the janitor with practiced bravado. Every step was a rehearsal for the next quip, the next laugh at someone else's expense. Walter might not speak, but Tyler would make sure everyone heard him, and for the moment that thought felt like power enough. Early morning light filtered through the courtroom windows as Walter paused at the threshold, mop in hand. He watched Judge Ramirez ascend the bench, her robes flowing like the current of a river carrying heavy stones, each decision another burden added to her shoulders. She straightened a stack of files and breathed out, as though seeking a moment of calm before the day's storm of testimony. Walter's gaze shifted to the gallery where families huddled together, some holding hands, others staring straight ahead, bracing for judgments that could change their lives. He swept in a gentle arc, careful not to disturb the hush that had fallen. His presence was a whisper, barely acknowledged, but his mind absorbed every detail, the tremor in a witness's voice, the way the bailiff's stoic posture cracked when she glanced at her watch, the quiver in an attorney's pen as he poised for a crucial objection. No one asked Walter for commentary. No one sought his counsel. Yet if they had, he would have known words to say, words drawn from nights spent listening, nights punctuated by muffled sobs in holding cells and the distant roar of traffic beyond locked doors. He had become attuned to the undercurrents of fear, hope, and desperation that pulsed through these halls. A young clerk passed by, dropping a folder loaded with affidavits. Walter knelt and gathered the papers in a practiced sweep of his hand, laying them gently on a nearby bench. The clerk mumbled thanks, eyes downcast. Walter nodded once, a small motion that felt enough. He didn't press further. Some confidences lived in the spaces between words. In the break room that followed, Walter lingered by the window, steam rising from his coffee mug. He remembered nights in Berlin, a makeshift safe house huddled behind crumbling brick, the air thick with smoke and urgency. There, voices whispered codes and prayers. Here, they whispered pleas for leniency. The rhythms were different, but the human pulse was the same. When the courtroom doors swung open, Walter returned to his beat. He passed the jury box, sweeping near the rows of chairs where 12 strangers sat, sworn to verdict. Each juror glanced briefly at Walter, their curiosity flickering before duty reclaimed their attention. He sensed the weight of their responsibility, the isolation of being locked in shared silence while the world waited. As Walter finished near the judge's dais, he glanced up and met Judge Ramirez's eyes. She offered him a tight smile, acknowledgment in a place where he rarely belonged. He replied with a nod, the invisible bridge between them humming with mutual respect. Then he moved on, mop gliding over polished wood, leaving behind a cleaner floor, and perhaps, for a moment, a glimpse of humanity in a building built for law. Silence followed him like a faithful shadow, carrying secrets that needed no voice to be heard. Walter paused at the threshold of the janitor's closet, mop resting in his calloused hand. The narrow room smelled of bleach and fresh linen, sterile and comforting in its simplicity. He turned on the single overhead bulb, its harsh light revealing rows of cleaning supplies and a battered metal stool near the back. He set the mop upright against the wall, picked up a damp cloth, and approached the small mirror propped on a shelf. His reflection shimmered in the glass, as if wavering under the weight of memory. Walter's eyes, deep-set and steady, met the jagged line of scar tissue that ran from his temple to the curve of his neck. The skin there was pale, puckered, an uneven road map etched by pain. He reached up, fingertips grazing the rough surface as though greeting an old friend. A single bead of sweat trickled down his temple, tracing a path over flesh that had once been smooth. For a long moment, Walter stood silent. The mirror reflected only his present self, the janitor, the loner, the man who made himself small in these halls of justice. But beyond the glass, the past waited like a closed door he rarely dared to open. He drew his breath in slowly, letting the closet's gloom press in on him. Then, unbidden, the vision came. Berlin, winter of 1987. The night air tasted of gunpowder and bitter cold. He was crouched behind a shattered wall, sweat chilling on his skin even as the flames licked across debris. Agonized cries echoed through the rubble as he beckoned two agents toward him. Their uniforms were singed, their limbs trembling. He'd grabbed their arms, pulling them free moments before the secondary blast ripped through the alley. The heat had been unbearable. Walter remembered the searing pain as he threw himself atop the agents, shielding them from the blast. He felt the fire consume him, flesh blistering, nerve endings exploding like fireworks behind his eyes. And through the chaos, he recalled a voice, firm, urgent, the one that saved him. "Keep moving! Get to the chute!" A flicker of agony passed over Walter's face, and he blinked, pushing the memory away as one would swat at a persistent fly. He returned to the mirror, steeling himself. The scar remained, a stubborn testament to bravery no one knew, and bravery he had sworn to forget. He dabbed at the mirror with the cloth, wiping away smudges until the reflection cleared. In the pristine glass, the surface healed of its blemishes, but his own would never fade. Walter straightened, folding the cloth with care, and stowed it back on the shelf. He took one last look at himself, janitor, veteran, silent guardian of stories buried deep beneath smiles and suits. Then he picked up the mop again, opened the closet door, and stepped back into the courthouse corridors where justice slept. The floors awaited him, clean lines to be drawn, erasing yesterday's footprints, but never the indelible mark he carried within. Late afternoon sunlight spilled through the courthouse's grand atrium, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. Velvet ropes cordoned off the lobby, where rows of white folding chairs faced a raised podium draped in red, white, and blue bunting. Reporters angled their cameras, murmuring into headsets. City officials in dark suits and judges in flowing robes exchanged stiff smiles and curt nods. The hum of anticipation rose beneath the vaulted ceilings. Walter appeared at the edge of the crowd, broom and dustpan in hand, like a silent sentinel slipping through an unwelcoming crowd. He paused briefly, observing the flurry of activity, the courthouse's transformation from somber temple of justice to polished stage for pomp and praise. His uniform, neatly pressed and unremarkable, marked him as part of the backdrop. He was meant to be unseen. Still, Walter moved with deliberate care. He swept a path behind the podium where the spotlight would soon fall and dignitaries would stand to be celebrated. The air smelled faintly of fresh flowers and sanitizer, a perfumed reminder that this ceremony was meant to wash away the courthouse's daily grit. He shifted the dustpan, gathering stray paper clips and confetti from last night's cleaning crews. He straightened a stray chair leg, rotated it 90 degrees until it aligned perfectly with its neighbors. For Walter, every detail mattered. He remembered Berlin's makeshift infirmaries, rows of wounded agents lying on gurneys, their eyes fluttering with pain and fear. There he had learned that dignity could be preserved even in the harshest circumstances, and that recognition, however delayed, mattered more than medals. Here, though, the only medals at stake were those pinned on sleek jackets, testimony to career ambition rather than sacrifice. Walter kept sweeping, head bent in concentration. He felt the weight of dozens of scrutinizing gazes, even if none dared meet his eyes. The courthouse staff admired the flawless setup, but overlooked the silent janitor ensuring the floor remained immaculate. A stagehand adjusted microphones, testing feedback. A photographer crouched near the front row, camera clicking. Walter's mop glided across the marble, the soft rasp of bristles against stone, like a heartbeat beneath the ceremony's grand facade. He caught a glimpse of himself in the reflection, a solitary figure tangled in the tapestry of red carpet and polished shoes. As the mayor stepped onto the podium, the crowd stilled. A hush fell, punctuated only by the distant murmur of traffic beyond the courthouse doors. Walter continued to work, each sweep tethering him to the moment, keeping him grounded even as the world prepared to turn its eyes elsewhere. He felt a flutter in his chest, not fear nor hope, but a quiet readiness. Somewhere among the polished speeches and framed commendations, a truth waited to be revealed. He tightened his grip on the broom handle, steeling himself for the moment when his silence would crack, and all those who had ignored him would finally see the man behind the scar. A hush settled over the atrium as the mayor cleared his throat behind the podium. Polished shoes clicked on marble as dignitaries took their seats, and the hush was punctuated only by the distant hum of cameras. Walter stood at the periphery, mop poised like a silent metronome, his eyes fixed on the floor's reflections. He felt each grain of dust beneath his brush, every irregularity begging for correction, just as he himself remained the courthouse's blemish nobody addressed. Officer Tyler, emboldened by the ceremony's gravity, leaned into the moment. He saw the janitor, head bowed, scar catching the light like a crooked line of white flame, and recognized a stage. With a sharp jab of his elbow, Tyler whispered loudly enough for the nearest guests to hear. "Hey, Two-Face, you reckon that scar's from a bad break-in? Or a fashion statement?" He let the barb hover, then delivered it again, louder. "What's the story? Caught in a blender?" A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the front rows. White-haired councilmen exchanged awkward glances, trying not to stare. A camera operator hesitated, finger frozen on a dial. Even the mayor paused mid-sentence, eyes flicking toward the insult's source. Walter's breath caught. His mop halted half a sweep. For an instant the courthouse stilled, not for justice or ceremony, but for cruelty. The scar on his cheek, jagged and pale, felt hotter than any fire he'd known. Yet he did nothing. His jaw tightened, capturing the tremor he refused to release. He would not give Tyler the satisfaction of a reaction. From the podium, the mayor coughed softly, clearing his throat again. But Tyler wasn't finished. He straightened, scanning the crowd for an audience. "Come on, man, speak up. You got that face. I know you got a story." His smirk widened, the uniform's authority lending weight to his cruelty. Whispers fluttered like startled birds. A young reporter frowned at her notebook. An elderly bailiff tightened his grip on a chair's armrest, knuckles blanching. The hush deepened into an uncanny lull, as if the building itself paused to see what would come next. But Walter remained unmoved. He exhaled slowly, exiling the memory of pain. In that quiet, he felt something shift beneath the ceremony's surface, a tension coiled tight, waiting. He remembered Berlin's ruined streets, the promise he'd made to himself never to let fear or ridicule break him. This was different. The weapon was laughter, the battlefield polished marble. He pushed his shoulders back, lifted his chin, and resumed sweeping, each stroke precise and unhurried. The motion wasn't retreat. It was reclaiming his space. And as his broom passed near the podium, something deeper stirred in the room. An unspoken question about dignity and who truly deserved its measure. Tyler's grin faltered. The laughter dissolved into a nervous shuffle of feet. And from the crowd's periphery, a figure watched with unblinking attention. FBI Director Clarence Monroe, whose presence would soon turn mockery into reverence. A sudden hush rippled through the atrium, as if the lofty ceilings themselves had pressed a giant pause button. The mayor's speech shivered and stopped mid-sentence, the word honor lingering in the air like a suspended note. All eyes darted toward the edge of the crowd, where a tall figure slowly rose from his seat. FBI Director Clarence Monroe stood with deliberate grace. His tailored suit, navy with a faint pinstripe, hung on him like a second skin of authority. Silver hair, trimmed close at the temples, gleamed under the chandeliers. His shoulders squared, his expression calm but steel-eyed, Monroe did not hurry. He waited, letting the tension build, until the soft scrape of his shoes on marble was the only sound. Walter's breath caught. He felt the bristles of his broom prick against his palm as though alive, alert to the shift. He looked up, eyes tracing Monroe's ascension through the crowd. No one moved to stop him. Nobody dared. The stagehand froze with microphone in hand. The photographer's shutter finger trembled. Even Tyler's smirk faltered, replaced by a cold frown. Monroe walked with measured steps toward the podium, each footfall a quiet thunder that shook the ceremony's fragile poise. Slowly he reached the front, standing just beyond the edge of the spotlight. The mayor, caught off guard, leaned back as if someone had jolted him with a question he couldn't answer. "Ladies and gentlemen," Monroe's voice resonated, calm, resonant, carrying the weight of years in service. The hush swelled around the words, and even the reporters lowered their cameras, mouths opening and closing like fish gasping under water. Walter's heart thudded in his chest, echoing Monroe's measured cadence. He set the mop against a column, stepping forward on unsteady legs. In that moment, the years of invisibility weighed on him, the nights of silent labor, the whispered insults, the unspoken pain of his scar. Yet he did not hesitate. Monroe paused, gaze fixed on Walter's face. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Monroe lifted a hand, palm flat against his chest, in a precise salute. His other hand rose to his brow, fingers brushing temple in a gesture that transcended ceremony. The room exhaled collectively, a wave of awe sweeping through dignitaries, officers, and onlookers. Monroe's voice came again, softer now, but no less commanding. "Walter Thompson, though your records may list you as a janitor, I know you as Sergeant Thompson. You saved my life in Berlin. I never forgot your face." Silence expanded, profound, respectful, almost sacred. Walter's lips parted, but no words came. He felt the heat of remembered flames at his back, the ache of burning flesh, and the surge of a long-buried pride. The broom lay forgotten at his feet, its purpose eclipsed by a moment of truth that finally burned away his anonymity. In that stillness, the courthouse ceased to be just a temple of law. It became the hallowed ground where justice was not only measured in verdicts, but in the honor owed to the quiet heroes among us. A hush settled like smoke in the atrium as Monroe's salute hung in the air. Walter stood rigid, the edge of shock sharpening every nerve. The broom at his feet felt suddenly trivial, its bristles brittle against the moment's gravity. Cameras flickered to life, reporters leapt forward, but no one spoke until Monroe lowered his hand and began again. "Walter Thompson," he said, voice steady as steel, echoing beneath marble vaults. 37 years ago, in the rubble of East Berlin, this man threw himself into an inferno to save 2 wounded agents. When the secondary blast ripped through our extraction zone, Sergeant Thompson shielded us with his own body. His face was scarred, so I could live. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Tyler's mouth fell open. The mayor's face lost its practiced poise. Judges leaned forward, robes whispering against chairs. Walter's heart pounded, each beat a drum announcing a revelation decades in the making. Monroe paused, letting his gaze sweep the assembled dignitaries. His deeds were classified, buried beneath layers of secrecy, sealed by orders I was not privileged to revisit until recently. But secrets cannot stay buried forever, and heroes cannot remain hidden. He turned back to Walter. "I never forgot your face, Sergeant, and today neither will we." At those words, Walter's breath hitched. Faces in the audience swirled past, some expectant, some remorseful. He saw the faintest glimmer of tears in the bailiff's eyes and felt the collective weight of every step he had taken in silence. He, the invisible man, had become the story. Monroe gestured to an aide at his side. Hands trembling, the aide produced a gleaming, folded document and a medal housed in a velvet box. Every eye followed the ritual, the unfolding of paper, the lifting of a lid, the glow of polished bronze. "On behalf of the President," Monroe intoned, voice resonant with finality, "and the Department of Justice, it is my honor to bestow the Medal of Valor upon Sergeant Walter Thompson." He pressed the ribbon across Walter's chest, the medal resting just above his heart. Silence cracked. A single clap, hesitant at first, broke free. Then another, then a rolling ovation that thundered through the atrium. Chairs scraped back. Uniform hats were lifted. Even the marble columns seemed to tremble. Walter's eyes glistened as he looked at the medal, its emblem catching sunlight like a promise fulfilled. His scar, once a mark of shame and idle whispers, now glowed as a testament to sacrifice. He lifted a hand to cover the medal, and for a fleeting moment, the boy who once ran from fire and pain stood again, no longer alone. Monroe stepped back, allowing Walter to be the center of attention at last. The applause swelled, a refrain of gratitude echoing off stone walls. And in the midst of it all, Walter Thompson, janitor no more, stood tall, seen, honored, and finally undeniably recognized. The night air in East Berlin tasted of soot and fear. Street lamps flickered like dying embers, their sickly yellow glow cutting through a haze of smoke and ash. Sergeant Walter Thompson crouched behind the shattered remains of a market stall, heart hammering under his Kevlar vest. Around him, the carcass of the city writhed in chaos. Sprawling barricades of twisted metal, shuttered storefronts daubed with desperate graffiti, and distant howls of retreating foot patrols. He glanced at the 2 agents slumped against the cold pavement. Agent Fisher's thigh was mangled, bone exposed beneath scorched fabric. Agent Donovan's shoulder hung at an impossible angle, his face drained of color. Their breathing came in ragged gasps, each. Exhale a plea to be anywhere but here. Walter's jaw clenched. He thought of the orders etched in his memory. Extract both, no matter the cost. The secondary charge was due any second, a kill switch buried under rubble to deny escape. Walter rose to his full height, ignoring the searing pain in his left arm where shrapnel had found home hours before. He moved with careful precision, lifting Fisher onto his back and hauling Donovan over his good shoulder. Each step echoed against crumbling walls, boots slick with grime and sweat. A sudden flare from an overturned vehicle ignited the night, revealing a tangle of wires, tripwire bombs set to slaughter any who tried to flee. Walter froze. He felt the heat of the flames on his face, heard Fisher's whimper, sensed Donovan's fading grip. Logic screamed, "Get out," but duty tethered him to his brothers in arms. He deposited the agents behind a fallen column, mapping blind spots as mortar shells thrummed overhead. His fingers worked deftly at the wires, cutting red with black in a dance learned in countless after-dark briefings. Sparks spit into the air, and a fuse died with a soft hiss. He allowed himself the smallest nod of relief until the world erupted. The secondary blast shattered glass and ruptured concrete. Walter threw himself atop the two agents, instinct overwhelming pain. The force slammed into his back like a freight train. He tasted copper, felt phantom flames lapping at his flesh. A white-hot agony roared in his ears as debris rained down. Through the deafening thunder, he registered one thing: Fisher's arm flinching, Donovan's shallow moan. They were alive. Hours later, amid the tangle of rescue crews and wailing sirens, Walter lay on a stretcher, the left side of his face wrapped in blood-soaked bandages. He watched the Berlin sky fade to dawn, its gray promise indistinct against the sharper clarity inside his mind. He'd done his duty. He'd saved them. Yet the cost was more than flesh and bone. His face would be a cratered map of that night for the rest of his life, a reminder of fire's fury, and of a vow he'd carry in silence, to protect, to shield, and to endure, no matter how deep the scar. The press room behind the atrium doors buzzed with fluorescent urgency. Reporters clustered in tight semicircles, microphones thrust forward, cameras swiveling to capture every angle. A government seal pressed onto the lectern gleamed under the halogen lights. Clarence Monroe, FBI director, stood to one side, composed but resolute. Walter, metal glinting on his chest, lingered near the back, uncertain whether to stay or vanish altogether. Monroe cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering on such short notice." His voice carried the patience of decades spent briefing Congress, the steadiness of a steady hand in turbulent times. As you've just witnessed, Sergeant Walter Thompson, known to most of you as our humble courthouse janitor, was once a highly decorated field operative in the 1980s. He lifted a finger, inviting silence. His service record was classified, sealed by executive order, and kept under strict lock for more than 30 years. A murmur rippled through the crowd. A reporter wearing a CNN badge leaned in. "Director Monroe, why reveal this now?" she asked. Monroe nodded. Transparency and recognition must go hand in hand. Sergeant Thompson's actions were hidden to protect ongoing operations and the individuals he saved. But the time has come to honor our heroes openly. Today we declassified his mission details, unsealing records that memorialize his sacrifice. He tapped a folder on the lectern. Here are the findings. In December 1987, during a covert extraction in East Berlin, Thompson led a two-man rescue under heavy fire. He defused enemy charges, shielded wounded agents from an explosion, and ensured their safe evacuation across the border. For these actions, he was awarded the Congressional Star, though the medal and citation remained in classified archives, inaccessible to the public and even to many within our agencies. A camera bulb flashed. Walter swallowed. Names from those archives flickered in his mind. Agent Fisher, Agent Donovan. The voices he had saved, long since dispersed back into anonymity. Monroe continued. Sergeant Thompson requested anonymity after his discharge, choosing the quiet dignity of civilian life over parades and podiums. He took up custodial work here in our city courthouse, serving without expectation of praise. That humility, I believe, is as commendable as his valor." A veteran reporter raised his hand. "Sir, does this change any protocols for recognizing other classified heroes?" Monroe's expression softened. "It does. We will review all sealed commendations and consider timely acknowledgement for those whose deeds have endured in the shadows too long." The room shifted, pages rustling, pens scribbling. Walter felt the world lens in on him, curiosity, admiration, regret. Doors creaked open behind him as courthouse staff peeked in, eyes wide. For the first time, they saw not a silent janitor, but a man whose hidden past had shaped global events. As the session closed, Monroe approached Walter. In the press room's quiet after the storm, he offered a firm salute and a whispered, "Thank you, Sergeant." Walter nodded, a lump rising in his throat. The scar on his cheek itched, a familiar reminder, but now it was not a barrier. It was a bridge between past and present, secrecy and acknowledgement, a testament finally laid bare under bright lights. Officer Tyler sat alone in the conference room, the door's frosted glass blotting out the courthouse's bustle. His uniform, once so crisp, now felt heavy on his shoulders, the badge warm against trembling flesh. Across the polished oak table, Captain Warren fixed him with a steady gaze, equal parts disappointment and authority. "Tyler," the captain began, voice low but firm, "I've read the reports. Mocking a coworker, making a spectacle of yourself at a public ceremony, it's unacceptable." He folded his hands, the soft scrape of cuffs against wood punctuating each word. "You humiliated a man who saved lives. You embarrassed this department." Tyler swallowed, his throat tight. He tried to summon the swagger that had carried him through endless drills, but the glare in Warren's eyes dissolved every defense. He opened his mouth, but only a croak emerged. The captain's disappointment was more cutting than any reprimand. "You're to write a full apology to Sergeant Thompson, personally in your own hand, and present it by tomorrow morning," Warren continued. "You'll also undergo sensitivity training and community service. Consider this your chance to learn what respect really means." Tyler's cheeks burned. He nodded, unable to meet the captain's eyes. The letter of reprimand slid across the table toward him, stark and official. He traced its embossed seal with a fingertip, as if he could erase the stain of his actions by touch alone. Later, Tyler found himself in the break room, staring at the untouched coffee in his cup. He replayed the ceremony over and over, the laughter that followed his insult, the hush when Monroe stood, Walter's silent dignity under fire. He felt hollow, his bravado replaced by something unfamiliar and raw, shame. When he looked up, he saw Walter returning to his mop. The janitor's gait was slow but unwavering, humility woven through each step. Tyler noticed how Walter's scar caught the light, not as a mark of frailty, but as a testament to endurance. For the first time, Tyler recognized the depth of Walter's silence, a silence far stronger than his own clumsy words. He swallowed hard and set his coffee aside. In the quiet room, he picked up a pen and opened a notebook. His fingers hovered over the blank page, then began to write, each word a small admission of guilt and respect. "Dear Sergeant Thompson," it began, "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you my understanding." By the time he finished, the page was full. His hand ached, but the ache was part of atonement. He read the letter once, then folded it neatly. Before leaving, he stood behind Walter and placed it gently on the janitor's mop bucket. Tyler's final glance at Walter held no arrogance, only a tentative wish for redemption. And as he walked away, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter, not because consequences had passed, but because at last he had seen the man behind the scar. The next morning, the courthouse atrium buzzed once more, but this time with anticipation, not ceremony. A hastily arranged press conference filled the space. Media cameras clustered like migrating birds, reporters murmuring questions into microphones, and courthouse staff lining the perimeter in hushed curiosity. At center stage, beneath the same red, white, and blue bunting from the night before, stood Mayor Helen Ruiz. Her usual composure was tempered by visible unease, shoulders squared, voice steady, but eyes earnest. Mayor Ruiz cleared her throat and stepped forward. "Good morning. I want to address what transpired here yesterday." She paused, letting the murmurs fade to respectful silence. Officer Tyler's comments toward Mr. Walter Thompson were cruel, insensitive, and unworthy of anyone in public service, least of all law enforcement. On behalf of the City of Franklin and every person who failed to speak up in that moment, I offer my deepest apology to Mr. Thompson. A ripple of approval coursed through the crowd. Walter stood just off to the side, metal ribbon bright against his uniform. He tucked his hands. Behind his back, chin lifted, but the tension in his shoulders eased. Across the atrium, Tyler shifted uncomfortably, eyes lowered. Mayor Ruiz continued, "Our city prides itself on justice and respect. Yesterday, we betrayed those values." She reached into a folder on the podium and removed a framed proclamation. "Today, we formally recognize Sergeant Thompson's service and sacrifice. I am honored to present this City of Franklin proclamation declaring July 2nd as Sergeant Walter Thompson Day, a day to remember that true heroism often goes unseen." An aide brought the proclamation forward. Ruiz handed it to Walter, their fingers brushing briefly, a gesture of solidarity rather than ceremony. Walter accepted the frame, the weight of its glass and wood oddly comforting. The crowd broke into gentle applause, not the stormy ovation of medals, but the quiet, heartfelt clapping of acknowledgement. One by one, members of the courthouse staff stepped forward, clerks, bailiffs, even the stenographer who once huddled in her chair. Each offered a nod, a handshake, or a whispered, "Thank you." Walter returned each gesture with a subtle smile, eyes glistening. In those small exchanges, the gulf of silence and invisibility began to close. Mayor Ruiz tapped her microphone once more. "Let this be a lesson. Dignity is earned in how we treat the least visible among us. Sergeant Thompson, you have our gratitude, our respect, and our commitment never to let such cruelty go unchallenged again." She stepped back and the crowd's applause swelled, warm and unwavering. Walter stood amid the claps, face turned toward the balcony's stained glass. For the first time in decades, his reflection in those colored panes was not of a scarred survivor, but of a man seen and honored by his community at last. The sunlight that had poured through the atrium's stained glass windows now glinted off the new arrivals in starched uniforms. A small detachment of Army officers, their dress blues immaculate, medals clustered like constellations on their chests. They moved with precise step, boots clicking against the marble floor, forming a semicircle before Walter and the assembled crowd. At their center stood Colonel James "Jim" Callahan, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, eyes reflecting both pride and solemnity. Walter's breath caught in his throat. He had thought the medal in Monroe's hands, the Medal of Valor, was the culmination of his recognition. Yet this was different. An official military commendation, decades overdue, bearing the insignia of the United States Army, and carrying the weight of all the brothers and sisters in arms he'd served beside. It was both personal and collective, honoring his sacrifice while acknowledging the institution that had shaped him. Colonel Callahan cleared his throat. The hush that fell was profound. Like the moment before a verdict, only the stakes were Walter's honor, not his guilt. "Sergeant Walter Thompson," the colonel began, voice resonant, "on behalf of the United States Army and in recognition of your extraordinary heroism on December 14, 1987, during Operation Iron Shield in Berlin, it is my privilege to present you with the Distinguished Service Cross." He lifted the gleaming cross from the red velvet cushion. The metal caught the light, casting a starburst of reflections across the marble walls. Walter's fingers trembled as he reached out, the metal unexpectedly heavy in his palm. It felt more than an object. It was a physical embodiment of memories he had buried deep, his body thrown over comrades, his face seared by fire, his silence held as a vow to protect their story. The colonel stepped forward, fastening the ribbon at Walter's left lapel. His fingers lingered briefly, a silent acknowledgment between soldiers whose bond transcended rank and time. "You saved lives," Callahan said softly, "and you carried those scars with humility. Today we correct the omission that kept your courage in the shadows." Walter closed his eyes, the rush of past and present converging. Somewhere in the back row, a battalion veteran dabbed at tears. The courthouse janitor, the man they had overlooked, stood tall in uniform, the scar on his face bathed in light. He could feel the weight of both medals against his chest, presses of metal and velvet assuring him he belonged. A murmur of applause swelled and then subsided as Colonel Callahan stepped back. Walter's gaze drifted to the faces around him. The mayor, the judges, the courtroom staff, even Officer Tyler, whose remorseful nod spoke volumes. He thought of Berlin's rubble, the sound of distant gunfire, the promise he'd made to shield the wounded. Now the promise echoed in applause and respect. Walter inhaled deeply, shoulders settling as the tremor in his hands eased. He gave a slight bow of his head, an old-fashioned salute that bridged the ceremony's gravitas and his lifelong devotion to duty. The atrium, once a place of silent labor, had become a sanctuary of recognition, where scars were no longer marks of shame but badges of honor finally brought into the light. The courthouse corridors, once echoing only with the steady rasp of Walter's broom, now trembled with hushed acknowledgment. As morning hearings resumed, staff and visitors alike paused in mid-stride to notice him, really notice him for the first time. The security guard at the metal detector offered a respectful nod. The bailiff lifted his cap. Even the court stenographer, whose fingers had danced across her machine while ignoring Walter's passage, met his gaze and offered a gentle smile. Walter walked with a measured calm, each step resonating on the polished stone like the toll of a bell. His metal cluster caught stray beams of sunlight through the glass atrium, scattering prisms across the walls. Where once he'd been invisible, now faces turned toward him, curiosity and reverence mingling in their eyes. He felt it in the weight of their stares, a warmth that replaced the cold distance of before. Passing Judge Ramirez's chambers, he paused at the nameplate and inhaled. Behind those doors rested decisions that shaped lives. But outside, Walter realized, small gestures shaped hearts. He offered the judge a slight bow, and she returned it, her stern features softened by gratitude that needed no words. In the clerk's office, a young woman approached with a stack of files he'd dropped earlier. "Here," she said softly, placing them in his arms. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson, and congratulations." His nod was the only reply necessary, brief, dignified, unassuming. Even the trainees in the prosecutor's gallery, who once jostled shoulder to shoulder, now straightened their posture as he passed. Some mouthed "thank you." Others simply touched their badges or badges of office, a silent salute in kind. It was as if his medals had conferred upon him not only honor, but an unspoken authority that transcended rank. At the water cooler, Officer Tyler lingered, rehearsing words that had once paid lip service to bravado. Now he stepped forward, voice low. "Sergeant Thompson, Walter," he began, using the name he'd learned firsthand. I just wanted to say thank you for everything." Walter met his gaze, saw the genuine remorse there, and inclined his head in acceptance. No lectures, no rebukes, just mutual acknowledgment of a lesson hard-earned. Throughout the day, Walter carried out his duties as before, sweeping, dusting, straightening, but each task felt transformed. The mop in his hand was no longer a tool of invisibility, but a symbol of steadfast service. With every sweep, he reaffirmed that dignity lies not in applause, but in unwavering commitment to what matters. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the courthouse arches, Walter paused at the atrium steps. He gazed upward at the stained glass, colors dancing across his scarred face like cracked light. In those kaleidoscopes of glass and shadow, he saw not just the reflection of a survivor, but the face of a man finally seen and finally honored by every soul who walked these halls. The courthouse break room was quiet, a small refuge of linoleum flooring and humming refrigerators, where the day's tension softened into the hiss of the coffee machine. Late afternoon light filtered through the narrow window, illuminating a solitary table by the counter. Walter sat there, steaming mug cupped in both hands, the dark liquid rising in gentle ripples. He'd poured himself a cup after finishing his rounds, an unremarkable ritual turned significant by the weight of the morning's events. His medal and proclamation lay folded quietly in his locker, out of sight. Here, amidst the hum of fluorescent bulbs, he savored the ordinary warmth of coffee and silence. The break room door opened, and Officer Tyler stepped inside. He paused, hand on the handle, eyes flicking toward Walter. In his other hand, he held a second steaming cup, black like Walter's. Tyler advanced slowly, seat squeaking as he pulled it out, and sat across the table. He set his cup down, fingers brushing the rim. "Mind if I join you?" Tyler's voice was low, tentative, not the booming bravado of weeks past, but something subdued, vulnerable. Walter lifted his gaze. His eyes were calm, inviting Tyler to speak without fear. He inclined his head once. Tyler exhaled, shifting in his seat. "I thank you," Tyler began, voice cracking on the words, "for not—" He swallowed. "For not walking away when I handed you that letter, and for not turning me in after what I said." He paused to trace the mug's condensation with his thumb. The steam curled upward, wraith-like between them. Walter listened. He didn't speak. He simply watched the younger man confront the man he'd once mocked. Tyler glanced up, desperation flickering in his eyes. "I wrote you that letter because I needed to say it aloud, out loud. I'm sorry, truly. I was wrong. I had no idea what you'd done, what you've carried. I have a lot to learn." Walter set his mug down and reached into his pocket, pulling out the folded letter Tyler had placed earlier. He unfolded it slowly, reading the neat ink across the page. Tyler watched his face, bracing for anger or rejection. Instead, Walter folded the letter back and placed it gently on the table. He raised his cup in a silent toast. Then, soft as dusk settling over the courthouse steps, he murmured, "Keep learning." Tyler's shoulders sagged as relief and gratitude flooded him. He lifted his cup and returned the toast, voice a whisper, "I will." For a moment they sat in comfortable silence, two figures bound by remorse and redemption. The coffee's warmth spread through Tyler's hands, the break room's hum a lullaby of second chances. Outside, the courthouse continued its steady march of justice, but here justice meant something different: acknowledgement, humility, and the courage to change. When Tyler finally rose to leave, he offered Walter a nod, no swagger, just sincerity. Walter watched him go, feeling the shift in the air. A bridge built not by words of condemnation, but by a simple gesture of forgiveness and a quiet promise to do better. Walter lifted his mug once more, drained it in 3 measured sips, and stood. The mop and broom waited just outside, but for now he carried with him the soft glow of redemption, proof that even the smallest cup of coffee can stir the heart to grace. Late afternoon light slanted through the courthouse's arched windows as Walter slipped away from the bustle of official duties. He carried no broom or mop. Today, his steps guided by something quieter, more personal. He walked past the atrium into a small side corridor, its polished stone walls lined with bronze plaques commemorating fallen public servants. Prosecutors, clerks, bailiffs, names etched in solemn tribute. Walter paused at the far end where a new plaque glinted. In memory of Officer Carl Jenkins, 1988. The date caught him sharply. Jenkins had been a young city patrolman, too young, killed by a stray bullet during a bank robbery years before Walter had awoken from his own circle of fire in Berlin. Walter pressed his palm flat against the smooth metal. His scar, a fractured landscape of flesh, tingled in response. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, the scent of old stone and polished brass mingling with distant echoes of morning. In his mind, he stood once more on that frigid Berlin night, sirens wailing, agents' groans muffled by winter's hush, the blast that marked the moment his world changed forever. The same moment had carved Jenkins's fate in another city, another hall of justice. Walter knelt on one knee, fingertips tracing the letters of Jenkins's name. Each raised curve felt like the echo of a heartbeat he'd once known, the courage of a stranger who, like him, had served in silence until the final moment. His fingers trembled as he remembered the weight of that explosion, the promise he made to bear every scar alone so others might live unmarked. A distant footstep startled him. He glanced up to see Judge Ramirez emerging from her chambers, pausing respectfully. She offered no words, only a gentle nod, and stepped back, leaving the corridor untouched. Walter exhaled, and in that moment his scar seemed to soften against the glow of remembrance. He rose, brushing dust from his knee. At the plaque's base, he knelt again to leave a single white carnation, crisp petals unfolding like a gesture of peace. He stood and laid the flower with intent, pressing it so it wouldn't fall. The reflection of the petals on the bronze shimmered like hope against grief. Walter straightened, placing his hand once more over Jenkins's name before stepping back. The metal at his chest caught the light, its polished surface reflecting the tribute he'd just made. In that silent corridor, the janitor and the decorated sergeant merged into one, a man who carried not only his own story, but the memories of those who'd fed his conviction to protect. As he turned to leave, Walter cast a final glance at the plaque, the flower, and his own scar in the polished brass. The jagged line of tissue across his face was no longer just a mark of survival. It was a bridge to others' sacrifices, an unspoken vow that their memories, too, would never be forgotten. A week after the ceremony, Walter found a plain cream-colored envelope resting atop his mop bucket, sealed with a neat strip of red wax embossed with the FBI crest. The envelope bore no date, only his name in crisp, looping script. Inside were 2 letters, their paper yellowed at the edges, tucked together with a faded blue ribbon. He carried them to the break-room table, where sunlight filtered through the high window, dust motes dancing like quiet witnesses. With careful fingers, he untied the ribbon and unfolded the first letter. The handwriting was elegant, precise, Agent Fisher's. December 16, 1987. Sergeant Thompson, by the time you read this, I trust you are safely back on American soil. I will never forget the weight of your arm under me as the charges detonated, nor the strength you lent my brother and me when we collapsed behind that wall. You promised you'd get us through the chaos, and you did. I am alive because you shielded me from the blast. I pray you bear your scars with the pride they deserve. With unending gratitude, Agent Andrew Fisher. Walter closed his eyes, the words settling like warm embers in his chest. Memories flickered, Fisher's ashen face, their retreat across the border, the whispered thank you he'd caught in the smoke. He smoothed the paper reverently before unfolding the second letter. This one was shorter, Agent Donovan's, scrawled with a tremor of emotion. December 20th, 1987. Walt, you saved me from more than the fire, more than the bullets. You saved me from despair when I thought the mission had failed. I owe you my life and my family's future. My daughter has your picture on her dresser, a hero who never seeks the limelight. Thank you for everything. Ever in your debt, Sergeant Mark Donovan Walter pressed a hand to his scar, the jagged ridge suddenly alive with tenderness. He remembered Donovan's grateful eyes at the field hospital, the way tears stained his uniform. He had never sought thanks. He'd simply done his duty. Yet these letters, kept secret for nearly 4 decades, validated every moment of pain and every step into danger. He refolded both letters and tucked them into the pocket of his shirt, alongside the medal's ribbon. Rising from the table, Walter carried their weight like a sacred trust. He walked the corridors with new purpose, not only maintaining order, but preserving the stories of sacrifice he now held close. That evening, he returned the courtrooms to their immaculate state, broom in hand, mop trailing behind. Yet with each sweep, he felt the gentle echo of 2 voices whispering gratitude in his mind. The courthouse lights dimmed around him, but inside, Walter carried a warm glow, a quiet reminder that in the silence of those letters lay the truest acknowledgment of his service. Late one evening, long after courthouse lamps had flickered off and custodial carts rolled into darkened closets, Walter stepped into the atrium for one last look. The stained glass windows were silhouettes against the night sky, and the marble floor glowed cool beneath his shoes. He paused beneath the central dome, savoring the hush that had become his companion. A soft footstep echoed behind him. Walter turned to see Clarence Monroe emerge from the shadows, his suit jacket draped over one arm, his tie loosened. The FBI director's silver hair caught the moonlight as he approached, and his eyes held a solemn warmth. "Mind if I walk with you?" Monroe asked, voice low yet carrying across the empty hall. Walter inclined his head, and together they strolled beneath the arched ceiling, side by side, but each lost in his own thoughts. "I wanted to thank you again," Monroe said, breaking the silence. He paused at one of the marble columns. "Not just for saving my life, but for doing so without seeking credit, again and again. You taught me something I'd nearly forgotten. True service is its own reward." Walter's grip tightened on his medal ribbon, thumbs brushing the cool metal. He said nothing, listening to Monroe's footsteps. "I've spent my career surrounded by commendations," Monroe continued, "but none have meant as much as this one." He gestured to Walter's chest. "And I promise you this. Every agent we train, every officer we honor, will carry your story with them. I will see to it that no hero's sacrifice is sealed away again." Walter glanced at him, a flicker of surprise in his steady eyes. He recalled the secrecy that had bound him for 30 years, the records locked by executive order. Now, Monroe stood ready to undo that legacy of silence. "Director," Walter whispered, "that means more than you know." Monroe nodded, stepping closer so their voices remained a private echo. "I'll establish a memorial fund, the Walter Thompson Scholarship, for children of fallen agents and officers. I'll work with the courthouse and the city to name a hall in your honor. This building, these halls of justice, should carry your name." A quiet swell of emotion rose in Walter's chest. He remembered Judge Ramirez's nod, the bailiff's salute, Tyler's apology, each a small step toward recognition. Now Monroe offered a promise that would outlast both their lifetimes. Under the dome's pale light, Walter extended his hand. Monroe clasped it firmly, a bond forged in fire and respect. For a moment, two men, one a silent survivor, the other a powerful director, stood equal, guardians of a truth too long forgotten. As Monroe turned to leave, he paused at the doorway. "Sleep well, Sergeant," he said softly. "Your watch continues, but you no longer stand alone." Walter watched him go, the promise lingering like a benediction. The courthouse, once just his nightly domain, had become the canvas of his legacy. He touched his scar gently, feeling its familiar ridge and the new path unfolding ahead. A path illuminated not by secrecy or shadows, but by the unwavering light of remembrance and honor. By the following Monday, the courthouse bore a subtle but unmistakable transformation. In a quiet side corridor, once devoted to forgotten notices and peeling paint, a new bronze plaque gleamed under a dedicated spotlight. Its engraved letters read, "In honor of Sergeant Walter Thompson, Janitor, Veteran, Hero." Walter paused before it on his evening rounds, mop in hand, and allowed himself a small, private smile. The corridor's walls, once ignored backdrops for whispered gossip, now bore this testament to a life of service. Word traveled swiftly. The next morning, a steady procession of staff and officers made their way down the hall, snapping photos with smartphones like pilgrims at a shrine. The bailiff stood at respectful intervals, nodding as each passerby noticed the plaque. Judges detoured from their chambers to read the dedication. Attorneys, en route to hearings, paused with furrowed brows and quiet murmurs of admiration. Walter watched from the far end of the corridor as the courthouse's pulse adjusted to this new landmark. A cluster of clerks hovered beneath the plaque, heads bowed in reverence. One young paralegal, a woman he'd only exchanged cursory greetings with, gently placed a folded American flag at the plaque's base. Her eyes glistened as she stepped back, hands clasped over her heart. Even the cleaning crew joined in. Roberto, who'd once rolled his cart past Walter without a word, stopped to rest his broom against the wall and offer a silent nod. Maria, the night shift supervisor, laid a sprig of fresh eucalyptus beside the flag. Their simple gestures felt like amendments in a long overdue document. The courthouse's unwritten code of respect finally updated to include him. Officer Tyler approached next, hesitating at the threshold before stepping forward. He stood a respectful pace away, shoulders straight, but eyes soft. "It looks good," he said quietly, nodding toward the plaque. Walter inclined his head. No further words were needed. The shared silence was its own acknowledgment of how far they'd come. As the day wore on, the new plaque became a focal point for conversations. Conversations shifted from administrative deadlines and case law to questions about Walter's past missions, the meaning of sacrifice, and the hidden costs of valor. The courthouse, built for justice, now also bore witness to compassion and remembrance. That evening, Walter returned to finish his rounds. He stopped one last time before the plaque, brushing the edges of its frame with a fingertip. The mop and bucket, his former shield of anonymity, rested at his side like loyal sentinels. Behind him the corridor lay silent, but now charged with intention, a pathway redesigned to honor a man who had simply done his duty. Walter straightened, slipped the mop into his bucket, and continued on, no longer merely the night cleaner, but a living pillar of the courthouse's legacy. His story, forever etched in bronze and in the hearts of all who walked these halls. Morning light filtered through the courthouse's high windows, gilding its corridors in a soft, noble glow. Walter moved along his familiar route, broom in hand, mop slung over his shoulder. But today, every footstep carried a quiet assurance. He had become part of the building's moral architecture, not simply its janitor, but its conscience. Ahead, Officer Tyler and his squad gathered by the security desk, reviewing paperwork. Their uniforms were crisp, but under their polished badges, something had changed. Each man's posture held a trace of humility. Walter felt their eyes on him as he approached. He looked up and offered his customary nod. Tyler returned the gesture, his expression open and respectful. No jibes, no whispered barbs, only recognition. At the courtroom entrance, a group of young lawyers paused mid-stride. One of them, a fresh-faced associate, stepped forward and produced a small folded note. "For you?" she said, voice gentle. Walter accepted it. A thank you penned in neat script, recalling how his early morning presence brought calm before each hearing. He tucked the note into his shirt pocket, heart warmed by the gesture of simple gratitude. In the gallery, an elderly plaintiff's mother reached out as Walter passed. "Thank you for everything," she whispered, tears in her eyes. Walter offered a reassuring smile, his own emotions held steady beneath a veneer of quiet dignity. He recalled the night he'd chosen silence over self-promotion, the vow that had nearly silenced his joy. And now, that joy found expression in these small acts of respect. A hush fell as he neared the judge's chambers. Inside, Judge Ramirez emerged, pausing mid-sentence with a legal brief in hand. She stepped aside, allowing Walter to sweep a stray crumb from the threshold. Then she offered him a warm, genuine smile. "Your service inspires us all," she said softly. "Thank you." Walter inclined his head, recognizing that dignity resided in giving and receiving respect in equal measure. Later, in the clerk's office, Walter straightened a row of chairs. The young stenographer tapped her foot to get his attention. She handed him a small mug of coffee, black, just the way he liked it. "On behalf of all of us," she said, "please know you're part of our team." Walter's lips curved in a subtle grin as he accepted the cup, the ritual of daily labor now flavored with collective acknowledgement. As the day wore on, Walter found himself pausing more often, lingering by the stained glass atrium where colored light danced across his scar and medals. He thought of the quiet nights he'd spent sweeping empty halls, the anonymity that once defined him. Now, every sweeping stroke affirmed a truth his actions had taught, that true dignity is not granted by rank or title, but earned in the steadfast commitment to serve others, and honored when we finally see one another fully and without hesitation. When evening settled over the courthouse, Walter set down his tools in the janitor's closet. He glanced at the new plaque in the side corridor, its bronze surface glowing in the lamplight. It bore his name, yes, but more than that, it bore the courthouse's promise that within these halls, every life of quiet courage deserved its measure of reverence. With that promise sealed in stone, Walter stepped into the night, his head held high, dignity no longer hidden but woven into the very fabric of justice he had always served. The courthouse lay bathed in the pale glow of pre-dawn as Walter stepped onto the marble landing, mop balanced on his shoulder like an unspoken promise. The world outside still slumbered. Inside, the building's heartbeat pulsed softly through the hush. He paused at the top of the grand staircase, inhaling the cool, silent air, and with it a renewed sense of purpose. Each night, he moved through the halls with a deliberate grace, sweeping away not only dust, but the residue of doubt and neglect that had long clung to these corridors. Now his path was different. He walked as a man whose every step carried the weight of history made, and a future reshaped by quiet heroism. Walter began his rounds at the plaque-lined side corridor, its bronze letters glimmering in the soft lamplight, a testament to a life once hidden. He traced the engraved words with his fingertip before bending to sweep beneath them, ensuring no crumb, no overlooked fragment of yesterday remained. Passing judges' chambers, he straightened stray rugs, straightened chairs, and aligned pens on heavy oak desks, a choreographed ritual honoring the dignity he had fought so hard to reclaim. In the clerk's office, the fluorescent lights flickered on, and Walter offered a gentle nod to the young paralegal already at her desk. She returned his greeting with a bright-eyed smile, stacking her papers neatly in response to his unspoken invitation. Let's start anew. He swept the floor in broad, confident strokes, each pass a deliberate act of renewal. When he reached the atrium, the stained glass awakened in the dawn's first rays, painting arcs of color across his scar and metals. He paused, letting the shifting prisms play across his face, and for a moment he felt the boundaries between past and present dissolve. The scar was not simply a reminder of pain, but a bridge to every life he had touched, and every life that now recognized him. Walter's final stop was the jury assembly room, where seats sat empty until morning. He knelt to pick up a fallen cushion, tucking it back into place with care. As he stood, the doors swung open and a late-night volunteer tutor entered, pausing at the threshold. She offered him a grateful nod, gesturing to the spotless room. In her eyes, Walter saw the quiet relief of someone whose efforts were mirrored in his own. Someone who, like him, helped set the stage for justice, learning, and hope. He lifted his mop once more, shoulders straight, and swept toward the exit. Each motion felt lighter now, no longer bound by invisibility, but buoyed by acknowledgement. The empty halls echoed with the resonance of a new chapter. One where Walter's steady service guided the courthouse forward, and where every sweeping stroke carried the promise of tomorrow's brighter dawn. With a final backward glance at the gleaming floors, Walter stepped into the morning light, janitor, veteran, and hero, sweeping forward into the next unfolding day. The morning paper slipped through the courthouse doors like a breath of fresh air, its front-page headline capturing a story most still found hard to believe. Janitor turned hero, the untold story of Walter Thompson. Inside, long-form features traced his journey from silent night sweeper to decorated veteran, and community leaders debated how best to honor his legacy. Yet for Walter, the true testament to his life's work was quieter than any headline. He arrived at the courthouse just before dawn, mop and broom in hand, greeted only by the soft hum of the HVAC and the echo of his own footsteps. As he rounded the corner into the atrium, he noticed a folded flyer taped beneath his plaque, an invitation to students at the local high school, encouraging them to visit and learn about his story. Walter paused to read it, a simple design, sketched in schoolyard marker, offering tours and Q&A sessions. He smiled gently. The idea of speaking publicly made his chest tighten with nerves, but he recognized its deeper purpose, to plant seeds of courage and compassion in young hearts. He swept beneath the plaque, ensuring every corner gleamed, and then made his way toward the community bulletin board near the courtroom entrance. There, beneath notices of public hearings and charity drives, his photo and story stood out. A lasting reminder that heroism often walks unnoticed until someone finally pauses to see. Throughout the day, courthouse visitors, students on field trips, reporters conducting follow-ups, even curious residents, paused to read his story. Many turned to Walter as he worked, offering shy waves or heartfelt thank yous. He nodded to each, returning their respect with a humble grace that no longer masked his pride. In the afternoon, a small group of students gathered in the atrium, led by a history teacher unrolling a poster about Walter's Berlin mission. They listened with rapt attention as the teacher described how a single act of selflessness could alter countless lives. Walter watched from the shadows of the colonnade, heart warmed by their earnest faces. He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow and resumed his sweeping, each stroke echoing the lesson unfolding before him. When the crowd dispersed, one girl lingered. She approached Walter, clutching a well-worn notebook. "Sir," she said softly, "thank you for showing us what real bravery looks like." She handed him a page filled with his silhouette sketched in pencil, beneath the words, "Our Hero." Walter accepted the drawing, his scar softening in the afternoon light. He knelt to her level and offered a rare smile. "Keep looking for heroes in unlikely places," he replied, voice low but steady. "You might be one yourself someday." As dusk settled, Walter locked the janitor's closet and stepped into the cool evening air. The courthouse lights glowed behind him, and somewhere inside his name still shone on polished bronze. He paused at the steps, drawing a deep breath of quiet fulfillment. In that moment, Walter understood the true breadth of his legacy. Not the medals or the headlines, but the silent ripple of inspiration passing from heart to heart. And with his mop and broom resting against the doorway, he walked home into the gentle hush of night. His story now part of the courthouse's soul, woven into its very stones, carried forward in the silent promise of every life he touched.